Hello, welcome to the brand called You. Today, the brand is Arvind Sanger. Arvind is an IITian who also studied at Tulane University. He worked as a sell side analyst at Deutsche Bank, DLJ, and Kidder Peabody, then became a portfolio manager at SAC Capital, and finally started his own hedge fund, Geosphere Capital. Geosphere Capital is a long short equity hedge fund which focuses on natural resources and industrial companies. Welcome to the show, Arvind.
Thank you, Sandeep. Glad to be here.
Let's start with Geosphere. Tell us about Geosphere and what do you focus on day to day?
So Geosphere, I founded in 2007. Before that, I had been an energy analyst at a number of firms, some of which you named, for 15 years. And so when I switched to managing money, it was focusing on energy first, and then broaden it out to natural resources companies and some industrial companies serving those sectors. So it was very much based on the experiences that I had as an analyst advising other investors, which informed my initial investment focus. And Geosphere was founded pretty much on those principles. But also, I would add one other thing that we added. I had started investing much more globally when I was at SAC, and at Geosphere, I continued that. And while I may have scaled back on some of the more global aspects of what I do at Geosphere, coming out of that was a strong India investment portfolio. And in India, we have, in the last few years, managed money in a long-only format, different from my long-short equity investing. So my day-to-day time today is spent half on the global long-short with the energy and natural resources and industrials focused, and half on the long-only India focus. And in fact, I must admit, more attracted to the long-only side from a long-term investing standpoint than the long-short, which I have done for the greater part of 17 or 18 years.
Okay, so to talk about both, let's start with the energy part. We are today, some people would say, in a post-hydrocarbon world or heading towards one. The landscape has changed tremendously. US is now a significant producer of natural gas and oil, and the dependence on several countries globally has gone down. With the advent of electric vehicles, how do you see the energy landscape? Is there any major shift you see happening like has happened in the last 10 years?
Well, what has happened in the last 10 years and what has made energy a very difficult place to invest in, and I know a lot of my contemporaries who have left the energy investment business or the energy and business altogether, is because not of what most people assume is the post-hydrocarbon era from a demand standpoint, but an abundance of hydrocarbons from a supply standpoint. So what shale oil has done is appended most assumptions about a cyclical oil where supply demand were forever tight, and we were talking just a scant 12 or 13 years ago when oil hit $150 a barrel. We were talking about the world running out of oil and there being major shortages and recession being induced in parts of the world that were oil consumers. If you go back to 2007-8, oil prices were above 100 and almost touched 150, and people were speculating about $200 oil. And then what happened is not electric cars. What happened is shale oil. And what has happened with shale oil in the last 12 years is dramatically changed the supply equation. And therefore, supply has overwhelmed demand. And therefore, oil has turned out to be, the oil companies have turned out to be terrible investments. The energy industry has turned out to be a poor return industry because while they found a lot of oil, they have not generated a lot of returns because oil prices have crashed. And in any commodity business, scarcity actually helps the returns and abundance hurts the returns. And so the success of the shale companies has been collectively the worst enemy of the shale companies and of the energy business in general. So demand is, if you take away the COVID effect this year, which is, unusual for a lot of sectors, demand in 2019 was at all-time high levels, about 100 million barrels a day. I suspect when COVID is over, demand will still be 100 million barrels a day a couple of years from now. But yes, what is happening is that as we're moving towards electrification, as we're talking about, more importantly, in the short term, the dual effect of abundant natural gas in the US and around the world, there's a lot of natural gas, LNG floating around, and coupled with the sharp fall in solar and wind power, alternative energy, coal has gotten significantly displaced. So in the US, coal demand is down by something like 30 or 40% in the last decade. That's a dramatic, so talking about one hydrocarbon, coal has seen a dramatic reduction in demand, which is why US has been one of the most successful in lowering CO2 emissions, because coal is much more carbon intensive than natural gas, and certainly obviously than alternative energy. And so you've had this big push. But even in places like India, you're seeing, oil is not used for power generation. Coal is and natural gas is. And in India, for instance, 60% of the power generation comes from coal. And today, in places like India, countries with, a lot of sunlight, and in parts of the country where you don't have much monsoons, like Rajasthan, you can find, a significant year-round generation of solar, and then other places where wind prices are now competing with coal prices, and therefore, without any subsidy or any other help, you're seeing coal demand displaced. So in a sense, you can see what will happen to oil. Natural gas is a transition fuel, but we can see what will happen to oil so oil has suffered from a plethora of supply, but it is about to go into the sunset of demand, in my opinion, in the next decade. So it is a challenge, and which is why also we are looking at a lot of the emerging energy, because at the end of the day, we will need energy. It's just that the source of energy may not be hydrocarbons, and you're correct that we are heading towards a post-hydrocarbon world.
Changing very quickly. I think nobody expected the speed with which this equation of production change in US. Changing to India, which is your other interest and passion and long-only investment that you do, we have seen the story of India being the next market of the decade or quarter century being talked about since 90s, and it hasn't come to fruition as much as people had expected. Now with the changed equations globally, with the China in lot more focus, and other markets like Vietnam and even Bangladesh stepping up, how do you see India's future in the next few years as a long-only investment destination?
Well, India has always been a story of bottom-up and not of top-down. And whenever investors have invested in India, and we're amongst those who have made that mistake of counting on any great top-down, tailwind from policy and other actions, we've ended up being disappointed. But India has a resilient private sector. It has resilient consumers. It's much more consumer-driven than many other emerging markets. It's not a command and control economy. It has a very broad cross-section of companies across a broad cross-section of industries. And India has seen major, top-down help, not when things are going well, but when things are going badly. And I think the COVID crisis presented such an opportunity. Before COVID crisis, this current government had been, to be perfectly honest, disappointing. They had taken a few interesting steps, bankruptcy law, GST, but there were implementation problems with GST. There were other missteps along the way, but there were no other bold steps. And I think this crisis kind of, in some senses, freed them up from this Soot Boot Ki Sarkar, thrown at them early in their first term, and also the China, I think misadventure in Ladakh by the Chinese stiffened the spine of the Prime Minister and the government to take action, to take advantage of the opportunity. And I think they got a lot of feedback from global businesses that there were some significant lacuna in what Indian policy had for them to choose India over Vietnam or Bangladesh or others, and so there were a couple of very bold steps taken recently, one of which has gotten a lot of political heat for, which is changing the farming related laws and agricultural procurement and mandis and a lot of other things, which I think will be significantly helpful because farming needs to be more mechanized, more efficient. But the other one was changing the law on labor. Again, you've had very sclerotic rules on hire and fire of labor, and changing that will allow for more job creation, for more manufacturing to move to India, which will also help move displaced farm labor because there's too many people on the farm. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think India may actually be in a position here where you could get the tailwind from these actions and from the China effect. Any of the smart Indian entrepreneurs where you could get, a decent opportunity. And also India's underperformed for 10 years. Usually these things come in cycles. So India's 10-year underperformance may be coming to an end. We've been wrong on this before. So, I don't want to bank everything on that, but that would be my
cautiously optimistic that we are at the start of a hockey stick.
Well, a hockey stick you never get in India, but you get a pretty decent ramp.
Okay. We talked about two very different things, the world of hedge fund of long short and the world of long, particularly bottom-up investments. And there is one famous bet between Warren Buffett and hedge fund investors where he famously in 2008 wagered that over 10 years, the top 5 hedge funds selected would not outperform S&P 500, and he won that bet. You have been doing both. How do you see it? Do you see the industry of hedge fund changing? And do you see the time for bottom-up investment is better? And if you were to make that wager now, how would you bet?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, that bet was made at the bottom of the market after the 2008 crash. The problem with that bet is hedge funds are not designed to outperform the market in a bull market. Hedge funds are designed to provide better risk-adjusted returns over a full cycle. And risk-adjusted means if you look at the volatility of the hedge fund versus the volatility of the market, and over cycle, which includes crashes and up cycles. But, I think, Warren Buffett was onto something after fees, hedge fund returns, even taking that into account, were not that exciting. And certainly in a bull market, you're never going to beat, because if you're running with one hand tied behind your back, trying to short stuff into a rising bull market, you're always giving up some part of your performance. It's very hard to generate,
So out of the 10 years, 2008 is the only year where the hedge funds outperformed, and the remaining 9 years, the S&P index outperformed the blend of the 5 hedge funds chosen.
Absolutely, and that again is the 9 to 17 was a bull market, right? So it was a strong up bull market with money printing by central banks giving you, so a speculative. If I were a speculative long only hedge fund with leverage, you could make a killing. But if you're trying to do shorts, you're going to get run over. But I think the broader question becomes long short versus long only, and I think the long short business and Sandeep, you would know it better than most. I think the long-short business has become for fundamental investors a much tougher place, partly because of the quant funds having become much more efficient at picking off inefficiencies in the market much more quickly, and therefore I think the long-short product as a product is becoming a much sketchier place for hedge funds, and I think the long-only place allows for, and we measure ourselves against the index, against the Indian indices that we compete against, and we are able to beat the index on a long-only product because I think fundamental stock picking allows you to pick the winners of tomorrow rather than the winners of yesterday, which is what the indices generally hold, and they don't switch to new companies till they become more successful. So therefore, I do believe that is the way that over time, smart, intelligent investors who are using fundamental analysis can add the most value. Long short, I think, will remain a niche product, but it has to be, within a niche that is well understood, with the risk-adjusted returns being the metric rather than a pure beating the S&P 500. That is a very, very tough one for hedge funds to match, which is something that they were able to do in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the markets were much less efficient. I think the markets have become much more efficient. Therefore, that ability to beat, the market with that significant, negative drag of shorts is in a rising market is much harder to do.
Mm-hmm. But hopefully, you'd be able to do better than the risk-free rate, which is now at 0 and maybe even lower. Well, changing gears from professional to some of your personal journey, let's talk about the phenomenal growth you've had as a person from all the way from graduating from one of the finest schools in India to now running a large hedge fund. Tell me, how would you see your journey? How is the role of luck versus hard work versus some other ingredient?
Well, luck is always important, and anybody who doesn't recognize that is fooling themselves or too egotistical to recognize how much of a role luck played in the journey. In my case, the first thing I like to remember is that I was an accidental engineer. That was not my first passion. I went there because
What was your first passion? What did you want to be as a kid?
Well, I wanted to study economics, and I would have done BCom because that was the only thing you could do in India at that time, to study economics. And my father looked at me like I was crazy. If you're smart, you either went into engineering or you went into medicine. Why would you go into BCom? That was, not the field that the smart kids, quote unquote, went into. And I had taken economics in 11th standard and switched out of biology because I was doing science with economics because that was my favorite subject, and I did that in IIT. I enjoyed more of that than I did of my engineering classes, many of which I ended up not attending. When I came to the US, I came to do an MBA, and I did not come to do a master's in engineering. I was one of the rare ones who chose right away that I knew that I didn't want to go any deeper in engineering. I came to do an MBA, and Tulane provided me financial help to come and do it, on somebody else's coin, and I did. And so I guess part of it was knowing my passion and sticking with it and having the courage of my convictions to not follow the herd of what everybody else did. I did follow the herd to go into engineering, but I didn't follow the herd into going any deeper into engineering. And therefore, chose to do what I wanted to do. And so, luck played a role in that. I got a summer job. So I didn't have a summer job, and somebody came and one of my classmates told me he had got one job and they were looking for a second guy at this investment bank to do summer research project. And I got into that research project working for an energy analyst. And that's the luck that carried me to, where I am today. I worked there. I got a full-time job. He didn't afterwards. One thing followed another. And again, it was, I didn't get that job because of luck. I mean, I got the summer job because of luck, because my friend told me, but I got hired by them because of my hard work and whatever else I brought to the table. And I think, in my opinion, success is, and I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before, success is a combination of, hard work and luck. And hard work is, 80%.
Hard work favors the prepared,
Yeah.
as the famous saying goes.
Yeah.
Well, talking about how you've been steadfast, sometimes as we gain experience, as we go through life, our views change, and some things that we believed to be true, we come to see maybe as more nuanced and change our beliefs around them. Tell me about something on which your view has changed as you have gained more perspective, something that you believed as a young man, which you now believe to be not nearly as accurate as your conviction was earlier.
That's an interesting one. I guess there are things that I changed 20 years ago, so that 30 years ago, so that wouldn't really apply. I was...
Whatever was the biggest change during your journey, that would be an interesting thing to learn.
One of the things that was an interesting change in my journey is, recognizing how much more important it was to be grateful and to give back. I think, the first 20 years of my career were more about acquiring and accomplishing success and measuring myself. Maybe even the first 25 years of my career were about measuring my success by my accomplishments, by, how I was measured by others, by, external measures, by financial success. And, financial, don't get me wrong, I'm not becoming a yogi and giving up everything. A monk yet. But I think part of it is measuring your success by how you not just help others, but influence others. I'm on the board of Pratham, which is obviously education, which is helping others, but I'm also on the board of this thing called the Alexander Hamilton Society, which is a US-based organization which is trying to bring debate and thinking about US role in the world to college campuses, because I think that there's a lot of one-dimensional thinking, a lot close-minded in a lot of students, and I want to contribute to that. And my next passion might be I might want to write a blog or write a book, which I haven't done, which I want to do, which is kind of try to share my journey and my experience and my thought process, and try to influence others to understand that perspective. Because to me, it's important to give back, not just in terms of money. Money is the easy part, but give back in terms of ideas, in terms of trying to
shaping the conversation in some way. And talking about this particular area of the US role in the world, that one is changing almost as much as the energy landscape we talked about earlier. We are going from a global, let's all be in a big kumbaya family and trade freely, to let's be isolationist and do our own thing. How do you see that? Do you see that conversation going in that direction more, or do you think it's an aberration that will correct itself?
Well, so the Alexander Hamilton Society is arguing the exact opposite, and right now the left and the right are converging to where both are isolationists, right? There's a competition for saying who has got the US less entangled in foreign entanglements, and I'm not suggesting that we send soldiers all over the world to fight everybody else's wars, but I do think that if you look at the world, which has been a very stable, growing, prosperous place since World War II, America has played a central role in that development. Without an America-led world, we would not have had the institutions that we did. We would not have the Japans and the Germanys and the European Union all being able to focus on their economic well-being while America played that role. Now we are in a world which is much more what's in it for me. And maybe there is some amount of backlash justified that US has given so much and maybe feels a little shortchanged in terms of people taking it for granted. But I do think it's a win-win for everybody. And we do not want a China-led world, because the only other option really is a China model or an American model. Which one would you rather have? And I think a country like India, it's very clear which way its self-interest lies, and is not in a China-led, closed circuit model.
I'm changing gears a little bit on a different question. This is about human nature. And any successful entrepreneur or businessman or even an observer of country also observes human behavior. I want to ask you, did you ever get really surprised by someone's action, whether good or bad, where their behavior was just such a dramatic departure from what you imagined or expected that it surprised you and took you to do a second take? It could be a good experience or a bad experience. I'm just interested in human nature and how we form a model of what we expect.
Well, I guess there's been, I think one thing about human nature is you take the good for granted and you dwell on the bad. So it's much easier for me to talk about in terms of what sticks in my mind of people who, I've worked with or interacted with who surprised me negatively. Unfortunately, there are many such examples, but fortunately, I would say that nothing that was ever one that caused me to lose faith in human nature or in the fundamental goodness of human beings. I think that, my experiences fortunately have been such that while I recognize the frailties of human nature and I'm no perfect human being, so I'm sure I have caused other people surprise sometimes by some of the things I've done. But
anything
you
can share in a kind of a way that it doesn't divulge too much, but at least gives a sense of what the surprise was?
Well, I think, one of the things that stuck in my mind this is from way long back when I was in India. I worked for a year before coming to the US. And I was working at this firm, and I had some friends, or what I thought were friends, who I shared with that I'd applied to the US and I was going to be going next year. And one of them, unbeknownst to me, because I suspect I was doing well and there was maybe a little bit of jealousy, called the office pretending to be calling from the US consulate to say that my visa was ready for pickup. And that was almost entirely just to, run down my position at the firm. And I thought that was, very, very underhand. And, it just showed to me how pettily, insecurely people need to pull somebody down to get ahead. Yeah. And I guess it made me trust people a little less about things that people will use if you're sharing with them to take advantage to use it against you. And luckily, it's not something that I've held on to in such a way, but it just remains in my mind as one of those things where I just didn't understand why somebody would be that petty to need to pull somebody down.
Yeah, well, it's somewhat linked to what you said earlier on how even in our journey and your journey, as you mentioned, you have transitioned from being in accumulation to being in more giving. In line with that, do you see how your own observation of human nature has changed? Are you surprised more on the positive side as you grow more on in the exposure and how people are giving back? Or not really?
No, yeah, I think so. I think one of the things, let me talk about one of the negative surprise, and then I'll talk about the positive side, is just in this election, the current election season, seeing the passions is good, but seeing the intolerance of the other's viewpoint, and I'm firmly down the middle in terms of which side I vote for on any given election. But I'm just surprised how people have taken this one position that if you are on one side, then the other side is
You're just morally defective if you're supporting the other guy right now.
morally defective or whatever. And to me, that is something I never thought I'd see in my life. And I'm not saying that the leaders are perfect and don't deserve that. But I think I've been meeting with people on both sides of the spectrum, and I have good friends on both sides, and I can joke with both sides. But what I find is that their ability to have that same ability to laugh at themselves has gone away a little bit.
Yeah.
And
passions are high, and I hope they settle down soon.
Yeah.
Election night is tomorrow, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Changing gears yet again to something lighter. If you have a completely free afternoon, Arvind, I don't know how rare that is. How do you spend it?
I waste a lot of time. I wish I had some very fancy answer, but I started learning the piano 6 years back, and COVID has thrown that for a toss. But it was something that I wanted to do. And my next ambition, so I wanted to teach myself. I'd never learned music. So it's something that I started doing, and COVID has really interrupted it.
So you were getting properly tutored in reading music, playing it, performing it?
No, just Western classical is what I started with, but I will graduate in jazz, which was my interest. So it's a combination of Western classical and jazz, and that's what I've been learning, and I really enjoy it. And the second thing that I have promised myself this year is I am going to, it's getting late in the year, I better sign up soon, is an online creative writing course, because I want to learn creative writing. And talking about free afternoons or free mornings, I just played 18 holes of golf this afternoon, and some might call it a waste of time. It's kind of a meditation outdoors. That's one way I spend either an afternoon or a morning. I sometimes play tennis, and then I read and watch too much news these days because of the election. So that's
everybody does. You're not alone in that one.
Too much time.
But the creative writing, I think, links back to what you talked about in terms of writing something to shape how we should be doing. But creative is an interesting part. Is it going to be a novel?
I don't know. I used to enjoy writing short stories a lot in high school, and I was very commended for it by my my English teacher. And I fell out of it, and some of my favorite classes at IIT were literature and economics. So there was somewhere in there interest in that. So I do want to try to see where it leads. The blog stuff is more opinion forming, but creative writing might give me a broader chance to reflect a little deeper.
Oh, how many people have been lost to the three idiot kind of journey where really your calling was something else, but you are getting a chance to redefine yourself, and fortunate to be able to do that. I'm going to go through a few rapid fire questions. These are the ones, as you've seen on some game shows, whatever pops in your head, that's the answer. It's got to be rapid fire. Most played song on your phone or iPod?
One of the songs from Umrajan, In Aankhon Ki Masti Ke.
पैमाने हजारों हैं, दीवाने हजारों हैं. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Favorite dish to eat?
Favorite dish to eat? I would say it's sushi.
If you're stressed, okay. If you're stressed, what do you do?
If I'm stressed, what do? I play some stupid game on my phone or my iPad.
A special gift you remember? Somebody gave you a gift that you remember.
A mug with my name inscribed on it.
Okay. All right. And a stroll on the beach, you're in Miami right now, or walking in Times Square?
Beach every day.
Great. Arvind, this was fun talking to you, getting to know you as a person. What is the brand Arvind Sanger in your own words? What would you put on the back of your book or novel when you write it?
It would be thoughtful, So how many words does it have to be, or what? It has to be a line or a sentence or whatever.
A sentence or two.
Okay. Creative, thoughtful, investor, and thinker.
And observer of world trends and events. It's
Yes.
great. Thank you so much for taking the time, Arvind.
Thank you, Sandeep. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.